Welcome to Maine. We're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising. The paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking. Won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie. Groceries climbing. The gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow. But silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answer should shine. The fact is fiction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis again, the host of the Muddy Waters Podcast, and here we are again, helping the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state. Today, we are fortunate to have with us former senior policy advisor under the LePage, Governor LePage, Aaron Chadbourne. And you're more than that, but that's one of the things that is part of your past. But thank you for joining us, Aaron.
Congratulations, episode 146. That's a lot more of a slick intro since the last time I was on your podcast, Chuck. You're really going up in the world.
I was gonna say I was thinking about that as it was going on. I was like, since the last time you've been on, we've definitely upgraded the experience. Was fortunate with one of our regulars here in Maine, a guy on X is called Cider, who helped create that the longer video. And then I used some AI stuff from Google VO, I think, to create the little brief one. But yeah, no, we've definitely gone up in the world a little bit, and we're excited to, I'm excited to keep, helping the people of Maine better understand what's going on. And as you and I have been talking and just been thinking about the field and the gubernatorial race, I thought it would be kind of helpful to kind of do like a path to victory conversation, kind of working our way through all the different candidates for governor, kind of starting on the Republican side, because that's who we want to see win, right? And then working our way, and also like talking a little bit about what it would look like for the bad guys to win. So yeah, I'm excited to have that conversation with you. Obviously, you have a little bit of knowledge and experience this stuff. And Cider is already here. He says happy to help, onward and upward. Appreciate that. I was very impressed. I told him what I was looking for, and he put that together using some AI tools. He's got the tech stuff down, so I appreciate that. Yeah. So obviously, one of the exciting things I think, in a lot of ways, as a Republican, is I like what I see out of our gubernatorial candidates on the Republican side in terms of policy. I think that looking at what all of them have talked about in their plans, I think all of them have a lot more to offer than anybody on the other side of the aisle, right? They actually have real meaningful plans, and I think the questions is how can they win? And so like I said, wanted to hear from you. I mean,
that's one of the interesting things about this election, right? Is that Republicans have been completely out of power for the last almost 8 years under Janet Mills. So you went from a situation where when Paul LePage was elected on the Tea Party wage, he had his first 2 years, he had a Republican majority, right? He had Republican majorities in the legislature. It brought them all in together. And that was really the chance to make the most impact. And then even when they lost the majority in the House, they still kept a majority in the Senate. So you had, I think it switched 1 year, but for his second term, he had Republican majorities in the Senate the whole 4 years. So you had Republicans actually able to get some policy done before. But for the last 7, almost 8 years now, Republicans have been locked out. This governor and her allies in the legislature have said, we're going to take away almost any opportunity for Republicans to weigh in. And it's very unusual. I don't think people realize how unusual it is not to pass a budget with 2/3, not to get legislation done on a bipartisan basis. That was business as usual for the legislature forever. Even in some of the days of John Martin, they would still at least involve Republicans. But the attitude for the last 7 years has been very hostile to Republicans in Augusta. And so I think there's a lot of pent up frustration and pent up policy energy from Republicans. So I think that's partially what you're seeing. And that's resulted in the huge field of candidates that you have. And that, again, is a bit reminiscent of what happens each time there's a 2-term incumbent. If you think about the field that Paula Page emerged from, there were a number of candidates there, right? You had Bruce Poliquin was running, Steve Abbott, Les Otten, Michael Jacobson. You had this huge field of people running, and it narrowed down. Paula Page was lightning in a bottle, and he emerged to the top. His story was so compelling. He had the experience being a mayor, and he really resonated with the moment and with the people of Maine. Similarly, when LePage termed out, you saw the opposite thing happen on the Democrat side. There was this huge field of Democrats that wanted to run. And the Republican field at the time looked a lot like the Democrat field does now. You had the Senate president, you had the House Republican leader, you had, and then Sean Moody came the outsider, but you had a small field of mostly known people. And so I think that's what the Democrats are going with right now, where the Republicans have just this wide field of a lot of qualified people who have a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and who have been fed up by what they've seen from Janet Mills and the Democrats' one-party control of Augusta over the last 8 years.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, it's a great analysis. And I think there are obviously some significant differences between now and when LePage ran. I think one of there is an independent, right, running, but unlike before, the independent is not a Democrat. Although a lot of the policies he's like, some of the policies where he's been breaking from the Republicans are strange ones for him, Rick Bennett to break from. And so I don't know, like, but one of the things that obviously that helped and propelled Paul LePage's first term was, that there was basically a divided Democrat Party. And so the people who would have normally voted Democrat, voted between the two, and Paul LePage was able to win. We're not looking at that kind of a scenario here. I don't think that, like Rick Bennett, for instance, I don't know how many Republicans he'll peel away. But I don't think he's going to peel away a lot of Democrats either. And so we don't have that nice benefit. And one of the things that I'm reminded of, and I say this as often as I can, because I think it's just wise for us to be aware of, is that, Donald Trump, who I believe from a policy standpoint is one of the best presidents we've had I think the best president we've had in my lifetime. And yet at the same time, he lost Maine by 6.5% in 2024, while running against the worst presidential candidate, in my opinion, in U.S. history. The only competition she had were the two previous candidates, in my opinion, on the Democrat side, in Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And yet he still lost Maine by 6.5 points, which means we really need independent voters in order for a Republican to be able to win. Obviously, there's a lot of hate and vitriol toward Trump, and so some people who might have voted for another Republican candidate here in Maine, most likely voted for Kamala, and so it might not be as tight once you peel back the vitriol and the fact that Trump really didn't campaign in Maine, which makes a huge difference. And these candidates all obviously will. I think it's going to be interesting, but like, I'm curious, like if we can, if you have anything else to say, I guess, in regards to what I just said, and then we'll move on to actual analysis of some of the candidates.
So I think the Trump factor is interesting. Part of why he didn't campaign in Maine, though, right, is he was focused on winning the national popular vote, and Maine wasn't really going to help with that. I think he saw that he was going to do okay in Maine's 2nd district, and he did. He won that electoral vote again. He's the only person in history that's ever peeled off Maine's electoral vote in the 2nd district. Maine's votes, one of the 2 states that does it, and Trump's the only one that's done it. He's done it 3 times. So I think he felt pretty strong about Maine's 2nd district going for him, and then he thought the 1st district he wasn't going to win, and he wasn't going to run up the scoreboard on the national popular vote with the size of Maine's population. But I think you're right to point out that there is that gulf, that there were independents that went for Kamala. Trump, he has a pretty high floor, but he also has a ceiling. There are people that you just can't convert. And so that is a part of the electorate. That's one of the things that make Rick Bennett an interesting candidate. And I guess we can analyze him later. But Rick Bennett, first of all, I personally like Rick Bennett. I think he's a good guy. I've known him for a long time. He was chair of the Republican Party. He cast the first ever electoral vote for Donald Trump. He stood up as the elector and cast that vote. So it's interesting to see him position himself as an independent and a moderate, although I'm sure he is one. If you look at what he's been doing in the legislature, he's carved out some positions that have separated himself from the Republicans. He works with the Democrats on certain things. And I think, he came when he was president of the state Senate, remember, in that weird power sharing arrangement they had because they had an even number. And I think he got to be Senate president for a year. And Nisha that got to be Senate president for the other year. I mean, Rick has always been his own person, and he's always had, I don't know, I've always seen him in more of like a Teddy Roosevelt, like conservation and nature. And, with his professional background too, in some, CSR, corporate social responsibility stuff. Like, I mean, that's very in keeping with who Rick Bennett, I think, is. And so he's continuing to kind of chart his own path. It does beg the question of what would the pathway be for him? And I think that a little bit is going to depend on who the other parties nominate, because in the gubernatorial election, there's not ranked choice voting. And so if both of the parties go very populist, maybe a center lane for the establishment opens up. I'm not sure. But I don't know. I don't know if the left is going to go populist. So we'll see. But I think it is an interesting question of what the impact of Rick Bennett would be and if he has a viable path. I think that we're in a world where partisanship is so strong, and the specter of Donald Trump looming over this election for the left in particular is going to make a difference. So it's just, I don't know. I think it's interesting to see whether there's a pathway for an independent.
Yeah, and especially again, I think the idea would normally be that, okay, if he's running as a Republican, he's more likely to peel off Republican votes. But some of the stances that he's made to make himself moderate are ones that I think you're going to find very few Republicans that, again, part of this, we've talked about this before, but is that we have to think like a I don't know, we'll call it a normie, like one of these people who is not, paying attention to politics nearly as much as we are. But if people are looking at the issues and they're saying, okay, Rick Bennett decided to keeping biological males in girls sports, and he also, is going to these rallies in support of the Somalian population in light of all the fraud that's been uncovered. Those are two really interesting lanes, and it seems like I think it'll be hard for a lot of your Republican voters who know about that, and I would imagine whoever is running on the Republican side will make sure that it's known to get on board with that. So it is really interesting, but the impact that he'll have on the election will be interesting to see. Assuming, I think we're going to operate from the assumption that most of the declared candidates, if not all the declared candidates, are going to get the signatures that they need, and that they're going to stay in it until the election. But that remains to be seen.
I don't think they're all staying until the election. So I'll give you what I think is going to happen based on how it's going to go. But I do think, just to kind of close the loop on Rick Bennett and his position that he's taking, I think the big thing that would be necessary for Rick to do well is for him to have the ability to speak with nuance. Because I think you're right that some of the positions that are, again, very popular, that seem to be like 80-20 issues, there are ways for him to say, we're in a polarized world and I want to try to turn down the temperature and bring people together, right? That's going to appeal to some people. It's going to appeal to people that feel that the Democrats have gone too far to the left, people that feel the Republicans have gone too far to the right. And so he can say, look, I think I want to crack down on the fraud, but I want to keep in mind that these are our neighbors and we don't want them to feel unsafe or persecuted or unwelcome. You can see him cutting some path. It's just, how do you break through the noise? And the other overlay that I've been talking about a lot this week of this election is going to be the massive spending in the U.S. Senate race that's going on here. If you look at how much money the Republican Senatorial Committee has already designated to protect Susan Collins' seat, I think they've set aside over $40 million for that already. Chuck Schumer just cut a check for $2 million to start airing ads that are airing right now. There's going to be massive spend. It could be hundreds of millions of dollars spent in Maine on that election. And if that happens, it becomes very hard for the gubernatorial candidates, any of them, to get their message on any of the advertising platforms. Television is the broadest reach and the most expensive. So then it all goes digital and it goes to these other channels. But nuance becomes hard, right? So if Rick Bennett wants to say that he believes that, and I don't know what his position is on girls sports, but he could have some nuanced position of, not excluding or allowing fair competition or biological tests, or who knows what his position is. I just don't know how the nuance breaks through. So I think that makes it harder for him. But I think that's really the only path, is if you have two polarizing candidates on the left and the right, and he can try to take the center path, the adult in the room, and say, look, despite our differences, we're one Maine. We need to come together. We need to respect each other, respect, and bring back that sort of thing. The challenge is usually when people are talking about civility, it's usually people trying to get the right to cave on their positions. They're trying to say, oh, the way that we'll compromise is to get the Republicans to just cave and give Democrats what they want. And that's not a successful pathway for anyone. But yeah, let's break down the candidates. Who do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so let's start with the first candidate to get their signatures delivered to the State House and be certified, Robert Wessels.
Okay, so here's how I want to think about all of the candidates. I'll sort them first because it's just easier for me to prepare that way. So I see there are basically 3 lanes and arguably 4 in this group. So the first lane is the populist lane. It's where people are in touch with the grassroots and the base, and it's probably going to skew to be the Trump lane because that's what the base seems to care about and be keyed in on is President Trump and his policies. I probably put Robert Wessels in that bucket. If we're putting him in a bucket, I think he probably goes in that one. The second bucket is the outsider, the government outsider, businessman lane. And that's going to have your, Jonathan Bush, Ben Midgley, David Jones, folks in there. I'm sure. No, David Jones would probably be the populist lane. I take that back.
I think you're thinking Owen McCarthy. Yeah.
Yeah, Owen McCarthy with that lane. David Jones, he straddles, but no, he's probably in the populist lane. And then the third lane is going to be your government insiders, people who have been elected before and are relying on that experience. And that group is going to be State Senator Jim Libby, right? And then Garrett Mason. And then there's probably a fourth group that I also might argue that Robert Wessels is in, which is the doesn't really have a chance lane. And so I don't mean any disrespect to Robert Wessels from that, because I think he's a very hardworking person. I think he's been out there since, I don't know, he declared a year ago.
July of 2023.
So he's been out there. It's just that he's new to politics. He's been breaking in. He's never held office before. He's been very active on social media. He's been very active with the grassroots. And I could be surprised. That could propel him. So we'll talk about him in that first bucket of populist group. But I kind of tend to group him and Ken Capron. How do you say his last name?
Capron, like apron.
Ken Capron. So I want to get it right. I probably put them in that kind of last bucket of they'll be on the ballot. They'll qualify. I don't know if Ken will get the signatures. But it's less likely that as outsiders who don't have the capacity to self-fund, that they'll be able to actually be taken seriously. But so Robert Wessels, if you want to evaluate him, I think the biggest challenge for someone like Robert Wessels, who comes in as kind of a political newcomer that isn't, very, 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 very wealthy, is that it's really hard for people to get to know who you are. And he's been doing the work, right? And I think he deserves a lot of commendation. He's been a grassroots foot soldier out there going to salons and town meetings and, the caucuses that are being held. And I think people have gotten to know him. I think people have gotten to know him, like him, and agree with him. The problem is in Maine, you can win a state Senate race or you can win a House race by knocking on every door. Like you can go to every door, you can introduce yourself to every person. And if there were going to be a pathway for Robert Wessels to win the nomination and or become governor, he would have to go knock on every door and introduce himself to everyone. But when you're running statewide, you can't possibly do that. In theory, maybe you could meet how many people vote? We have like
a million, and not, it's in the I think the last gubernatorial election was like, what was it, like 680,000 maybe?
So we'll call it 700,000. So there are going to be 700,000 voters. In theory, there's probably enough time to meet 700,000 people, but there's not enough time to travel the entire state and personally knock on every door. You can't do it. And so you need to reach them in other ways. And that means you need to have the resources to do it. And when you're trying to get big donors to write big checks, or when you're trying to inspire the grassroots to give you millions of small donations, you really need to have a bigger platform than what he has coming in. And so he just starts out behind the 8 ball. Doesn't say it's impossible, but it would have to be some sort of grassroots groundswell movement. And because there are other people in the lane that he's in, I think that makes it difficult for him to rise up. So I think his thing that he could do is he could continue, putting in the work and getting out there and meeting people. But everyone else is doing that too. And people are going to just ask this viability question. I think that's going to be his biggest thing to overcome. If he were able to raise $1 million, if he were able to write himself a check for $1 million, if he were able to do some things like that, I think that's the only thing that makes a difference. Or if he were able to gain like 500,000 followers on any platform, right? If he were to have something like that, that's his only pathway that gives him a platform. Otherwise, I think, my advice for Robert Wessels, and he hasn't asked me, and I don't mean this as an insult, I think he'd be a great person to pick a candidate that he thinks is most clearly aligned with him, endorse them early, go help them, and then maybe join their administration if they win. Like that would be, I think, his best path to being the most relevant over the long term.
Interesting. Well, I definitely think that he's proven that he has the ability to coordinate people. I mean, the fact that without any money, with just volunteers, he's been able to be the first person. I think we believe. I mean, I haven't done the research to prove it, but that he might have got his signatures faster than anybody and got them certified faster than anybody, at least in recent history. And so, obviously, he's got a lot, the work that he's been putting in for the past 2.5 years is having an impact. But again, is it enough? And one of the things we never know until it actually happens, especially with Maine elections. Nationally, there's enough money to be spent on polls to have a great idea. But here in Maine, we won't know until the votes are actually cast. But to your point, the reality is you do need to get yourself in front of people and I think his idea and starting in 2023 was, this gives me time to get in front of as many people as possible. But again, I don't think he's met 700,000 people. And so I think needing either earned media, as you said, or coming up with some money to get in front of people before the Senate race takes over all the airwaves.
I think he would have needed to do it by now, right? I think if he were going to break through, if he were going to have kind of a Paula Page, groundswell, lightning in the bottle type thing, he would have needed it before now, because now you have a wide open field where you have some pretty heavy hitters in there. And I think it makes it difficult for him. But I agree with you. I think what he's done it's pretty impressive, the work that he's put in, how it's paid off. I think he's probably a good organizer. That's why I think he'd be an asset to one of the other candidates. But I mean, he's one that I think will make it. He'll stay on the ballot. I think people like him, they're true believers. They believe what they say. He's a person of integrity. He's probably going to want to see it through. And that's totally his right to do it. I'm just kind of sizing up what I think his best chances are and how he could make the biggest impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's stay in that same lane and move in the kind of the populist lane and move on to the GOP, he's the self-described, and I think probably most people who are paying attention in the recent polling would agree with as being the current GOP frontrunner, Bobby Charles.
Yeah. So Bobby Charles, I think you're right. I think in the populist lane, I think he's clearly the top of that pack at the moment, based on momentum, based on he also is someone that started early, right? He started doing the work early. He explored running for attorney general in the state of Maine. And Maine, of course, is a bit strange in that we're the only state where the legislature gets to pick who the attorney general is. And it's a one member legislature, one vote thing. So even when Republicans had control of the Senate, there were more Democrats in the House. And so the Democrats got to pick the attorney general that would serve alongside Governor Paula Page, which is how we had Attorney General Janet Mills for so much of the LePage administration. So he tried to run for attorney general. There was an interesting kind of dynamic when he did that because the members of the legislature, it's such a like outsider insider thing. The members of the legislature were like, well, one does not declare oneself a candidate publicly. You've got to come kiss the ring. And so then they nominated someone else so that they could assert their power. So it was a very interesting introduction for him, I think, to Maine politics and Maine Republicans. And since that time, though, he spent time saying, all right, what are the other ways I could contribute? And I think he probably would have been a great attorney general. And so I think Maine Republicans probably should have nominated him. So since that time, he's really looked at what are the ways I could get involved, and running for governor seemed like a natural springboard for him. And he's since that time gotten to work. And so it's been, I think, when did they come in? A year ago, November. So I think he's spent almost a year kind of doing this as well. He's spoken to everyone. He's been everywhere. I don't think there's a Republican committee that he hasn't met with or been in front of. And a lot of people like him, right? I think he's done well honing in on the red meat issues that Republicans care about. He's been the most visible in terms of picking fights with the left. He was talking about the fraud in Lewiston before anyone else. And I think he's probably been the most in touch with, we'll call it the Maine Wire crowd and the Maine Wire issues. If there's an issue elevated by the Maine Wire, he's on top of it. So I think he kind of has come out of that populist energy. The thing that Bobby Charles needs to do to win the Republican primary, I think he's got to simplify his message. I think he's a very smart guy, and he has a tendency to go very deep on a lot of policy issues. And I think voters don't get enough exposure to candidates and their platforms to understand everything. So you've both got to have the master plan, and then you've got to have a way to communicate it very succinctly. And so I think that was one of the weaknesses of Paula Page's campaign against Janet Mills, is that it never coalesced on some clear central messaging that was able to win. So I think Bobby Charles needs to do that for the primary in order to win. And he's also got to, I think, demonstrate his path to winning statewide. To your point earlier, the people that didn't vote for Donald Trump for president in the presidential election are going to have a hard time voting for someone who's running and sounds a lot like Trump in the general. And because it's a midterm election, there are going to be a lot of people voting, even though CD1 is probably pretty safe for Shelley Pingree. If she makes it to election day, if she stays on the ballot, there's speculation that she has other tricks up her sleeve. Who knows? Even if it's not Shelley Pingree, it's still probably a safe Dem seat in CD1. Although I do like Ron Russell quite a bit. Great guy. He ran once and got established a bit. Now he's running a second time to build on what he learned. And so hopefully he'll do better, and you'll see gains from him this time. But the people in CD1, even though they're not that worried, the Democrats, the far left voters in CD1, even though they're not worried about losing it, they're going to turn out because they want to send a message to Donald Trump. They've been activated. They're the people that are out, protesting in Monument Square in Portland or, on the coast. Like, these people are going to show up. And so there have to be some anti-Trump people who are willing to vote for the Republican nominee. And so Bobby Charles has to make that case too, that he's electable statewide against a Democrat. I think Bobby Charles is probably, and anyone from this populist lane, that if they were to be the nominee, they're the ones that give Rick Bennett a lane, right? Because Rick Bennett can run as a centrist, say these people are extreme over here, extreme over there, I'm in the middle. So I think he has to make the case of how he can bring, broaden the tent. I think that's one of the things that Paula Page did very well when he ran and won, is that he brought people in that identified with his background, that identified with the fact that he, English wasn't his first language, that he grew up homeless, that he had experience with welfare, and he knew firsthand about the reforms that were needed, and he wanted to give people a hand up, not a handout. You have to be able to grow the tent in some way, and I think that's the part that I haven't heard Bobby Charles articulate yet. in the primary, there's also, I think he's done a pretty good job defining himself, but at some point, he's going to have to come to terms with his past service in government. And he does. He's talked about it. But as people meet him, the fact that he served in the Bush administration under Colin Powell, in some circles, that's going to be a strength. In other circles, it could be a liability because the party has moved and changed their opinions. And he's just going to have to address that. And I think he's done it a few times and he probably thinks it's behind him, but I think he's still going to have a good approach on that if he's going to win the nomination.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he has an incredible resume, right? You look at the things that he's done, like he has the experience, but as you're saying, that's kind of a little bit of a problem. And again, I don't know that I would put him necessarily in he's definitely populist, but like MAGA camp necessarily, maybe MAGA light, maybe he's fully embracing, but it seems like we'll get to David Jones in a bit, but David Jones is definitely very MAGA. He's very proud of the fact that
I think David Jones has not changed positions on much of anything. I think he was one of the first people in the state of Maine to declare their support for Donald Trump the first time he ran for president. He created a state PAC for Trump. So I think David Jones has always been a Trump guy. I have to imagine, I don't know who Bobby Charles supported for president in that Republican primary, but wouldn't you have to think it was like Jeb Bush back then?
Probably. I mean,
I would imagine. I don't know. I'm speculating, so I shouldn't guess.
But Ted Cruz, maybe, yeah,
maybe. And Maine, yeah. Ted Cruz won Maine, right? So that there are a lot of Republicans for whom that's also similar. I don't know. So I think it'll be interesting, but I do think that he, being a convert to a group is also fine because you can tell your story of what it was that mattered to you and what's important and how you identify. There are a lot of people that may not have supported Trump that came along to Trump, and he can relate to that experience. But again, it's going to be hard to break through to everyone. And I do think, though, he probably had the best social media strategy up front as well. And so he kind of caught on a bit more and win a bit more. And part of by being relevant, being in the right place at the right time. So I think Bobby Charles, you're right to say that he's kind of the front runner, but he isn't the decisive leader in the pack. And that's the type of thing that leaves room for someone else to eclipse him and led people like Garrett Mason to get in the race. If there had been a strong favorite, Garrett Mason wouldn't have gotten in, right? But Garrett saw that there was an opening, and that's why he's jumping in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if a couple of the other potentials like Laurel Libby or Sean Moody had entered the race. But I think without them entering the race, I think there isn't a clear, decisive front runner at this point. Even though Bobby Charles has the lead, and as you said, he actually got out. I think he got out a little earlier because over a year ago, I think a year and a half ago, he was actually going around to county meetings and different things like that. And he was a year ago, he spoke at I think he was telling me because he spoke at our Lincoln dinner here in Cumberland. He spoke at 11 different Lincoln dinners or breakfasts or things like that. So he's definitely done some things to get out in front. I think partly my guess is because he knew that there might be some other people with more money and that he would need to get out there ahead and do the grassroots organizing. And so he definitely did that. But I agree with you. The challenge for anybody who is in the populist lane, in the MAGA lane, is kind of overcoming that a little bit. And I think one of the ways that I think there is potential to overcome it is increasing voter enthusiasm. One of the pros and cons that we used to say about Trump, right, is that he was his own worst enemy. He's going to get people out to vote for him, but he's also going to get people out to vote against him. And I think being the lower voter turnout party now, we're the low propensity voters because your working class doesn't get out and vote. They tend to vote more Republican, but they don't get out and vote in every election. Having somebody that gets them out to vote, that could be that theoretically could be enough to make a difference, depending on whether or not. Again, I still think you have to do something to bring in those middle of the road voters. And maybe it's well within the realm of possibility that the economic situation will be such here in the state of Maine that more people than we expect will be willing. That might sway us 5% in and of itself, right?
Maine has pretty healthy turnouts even in off years, though. So you're going to have pretty good turnout. I think that speaks to another point, though, that we haven't really spent much time on, is that many of these candidates have never run for office before, Bobby Charles among them, right? So he's never run a campaign before. And so he has to have a campaign team. And I'm not as familiar with who all is involved in each aspect of it, but he's going to have a campaign team that knows how to do voter turnout. And again, that costs money. You can see in the finance reports that came out, a lot of them are spending money on their staff, on their team. That's, I think, the biggest expenditure they've all had so far. So it's really, I think driving turnout is going to be important.
Yeah, it's one of the most important things for us in this election. Hopefully there's a plan there for all of them. So let's move on to let's just finish out the populist lane, I guess, and deal with or not deal with, but talk about David Jones and his. So one of the things I'll start just by saying that he's done a really good job also at trying to get out there grassroots wise and, going to school board meetings and things like that and hitting on some of the 80-20 issues. So that's one thing that I've definitely appreciated about him. And I think you mentioned this earlier. One of the things that I think as I'm learning about politics is really important is authenticity. And as you said, David Jones is David Jones. And like, I've had conversations with him and
a lot of grassroots relationships that he's had for decades, right? He's been active. He's lived in different parts of Maine. He's run a business and he's supported Republican candidates. So he has relationships that go back a very long time. And so a lot of the strength behind him and his team, a lot of those are long held relationships. They didn't just pop up because he's running for governor. He didn't develop any of his policy positions because he's running for governor. He's been standing in the same spot with the same beliefs and working toward the same goals. And so I think that certainly works in his favor in terms of, likability, relatability, and respect that people will have for him.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of my takeaway initially, but I'll let you kind of go into the rest of like, what's his path to victory?
I think so. The issue is, in order for him to have a path to victory, he has to become the top person in his lane, right? He has to be the top populist candidate we're talking about. And so I don't know, honestly, how you compete with someone that has more followers. So I guess his biggest hope is that something goes wrong with Bobby Charles and Bobby Charles stumbles in some way or has a scandal, and then he's able to overtake him. Or he has to find a way to point out differences between himself and Bobby Charles. Because I think that's really the lane. You have to say, we need a populist, we need an outsider. I do think that this is where I was saying earlier that he straddles the line between outsider and businessman and populist, is that is one of the things that does differentiate him, is that he does have a more clear business background. And one of the key issues right now in the election is going to be housing and cost of living and affordability. And as a developer, as someone with a real estate background, he has the ability to kind of he has to take an issue and own it and really be known for something. So I think the key for David Jones is to own the issue, break through, and he's going to have to eclipse Bobby Charles. That's what he's going to have to do in order to win the primary. In order to win the general, again, I think he becomes a little bit hard because he gets very Trump associated. And so he's going to have to say, here's how I'm going to appeal to independents in the general. I think he's kind of the opposite of what you were saying about Rick Bennett, in terms of Rick Bennett, being on stage at the Lewiston Somali Center. David Jones, you're right, is the one that's been going to school board meetings and speaking out on behalf of the issues that Republicans have been raising. And so he would have to, again, have a strategy for how he's going to broaden that tent. And I don't know what it is. And so he's going to have to convince people of that as well. I think he's also going to have, he's shown that he can raise some money. They've all raised some money, but none of them have raised like scare you out of the race money, right? If someone came in with, $50 million raised, everyone else gets out. Like that's that. If you come in, everybody has a couple $100,000, and David Jones does have, the ability to write himself a check. I do think, though, my experience is that I'm going to call him a small businessman, not to say that he's not effective, but he's not like, a multinational corporation, right? He didn't, I think compared to like Sean Moody, right? Sean Moody is probably still kind of technically small business, but he's statewide. He has, a much larger footprint. David Jones is a small business guy. Small business owners that understand how to read a financial statement, they feel it when they write a big check. So David Jones can self-fund part of it, but he's going to feel it and it's going to bother him. Like, businessmen don't like writing big checks for politics. They just don't. Even if it's their own campaign, even if they believe in themselves. And at a certain point, you'll see that you've seen it happen. I think Sean Moody felt this way. I think Bruce Poliquin was a prolific fundraiser, so he barely had to use his own money for anything. Mike Thibodeau, when he was running for governor, I think when you have to start spending your own money, like really spending real money, and write yourself a check for $10,000, $100,000, that's real money. And so I think if that is his pathway, those are the types of things that pressure candidates to bow out. So if he finds that he has enough money, if he finds that he's breaking through, if he finds that he owns an issue, but again, the issue's got to be his, in the way that Laurel Libby made the girls' sports issue her issue. That was her lane, and it was uniquely hers. David Jones would have to do that on affordability or housing in some way and really break through. But again, I think he has a lot of consistency, and he has a following of people that have known him for a long time, and authenticity.
Yeah, and I think he's got a decent team of people around him, and I think that's part of what he's hoping will differentiate him a little bit. David Boyer, and some of the Representative David Boyer and some of the other people. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the winning the primary is going to be a challenge. Obviously, like you said, I think I agree. He has to eclipse Bobby Charles, in some form or fashion. So let's move on to like the business owner, or the entrepreneur, or however you want to put that category. What?
The business outsider lane.
The business outsider lane. I like it. All right, so let's start with the guy who's raised the most money, and has the I think best and worst last name, in Jonathan Bush.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Bush, he comes in with the advantage of having access to fundraising, right? He has access to his family's political connections, which I think gives him a big leg up in the fundraising game, gives him a big leg up too with name recognition. He comes in with everyone knowing his last name, and even if they don't know who he is, they're going to know him. It's similar to Dr. Shah on the other side. Everyone knows who Dr. Shah is because he, was on our TV several times a day for a period of years, dictating what freedoms you were able to exercise in this state. So he comes in with name ID, which, even if it's negative, it's helpful because you don't have to spell, like Robert Wessels, no one's ever heard of. Jonathan Bush, people are like, oh, he's a Bush and he's running. It's a very different reaction. So he comes in with a last name, which I think is on net a help to him more than it is a hindrance. I do think there is still residual fondness in Maine among some people for the Bush family, having lived in Maine. George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush were very well liked and loved. And when President Bush, George W. Bush was president, he spent time in Maine and was very well liked. I think, obviously the forever war overhang and that kind of pall that's associated with their escapades in Iraq and Afghanistan has sullied and tarnished the legacy. But if he can, differentiate himself on that, and as governor of Maine, he's not going to be getting us into any wars, right? So I think that, could be something that he could put behind him in terms of the dislike, as long as he's able to differentiate himself. So I think Jonathan Bush comes in with a financial advantage, with a name recognition advantage. I think he has capacity to write himself very big checks. And I think he's had a bigger, higher degree of business success than someone like David Jones. So he can spend the money without missing it as much. I think, the big question for him is, I think his policy, the area that he's strongest on policy has seemed to be business development and economic messages. So if he can break through on that, I think that's very good for him. But he's going to have to, for the people that vote in a Republican primary, he's going to have to, they're people that want to know that you believe what you say. And so he's going to have to show that he knows what's important to them and that he's in line with what the core tenets of those party beliefs are. So I think that's kind of the thing for him. I think his way of doing it is, he can spend money. He can go on TV or start doing videos. He can start, communicating. I think, again, it's going to be about what is your core message? What are you running on? And I've been very impressed, by his ideas, by his energy. But he's going to have to spend time building trust, I think, with voters.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I also think there's a different conversation about like his path to winning the primary versus his path to winning the general. Because I think when when I look at with him, like a lot of the stuff that he's doing and he's saying, right? So like recently, obviously, I think this is one of those things where I was talking to somebody and they were like, well, I'm going to write him off because of his comments on that, right? Which had to do with ICE and saying that ICE needed to calm down. I think that's for Maine, that's a message that sounds a lot better to the general populace, even though Republicans. And I think like it's hard to trust polling because like some of these online polls, Bangor Daily News did something that ended up getting flooded most likely with conservatives, and it said 85% of Mainers are in favor of ICE. I don't know what the actual numbers are. I would think that it's probably generally speaking, most Mainers are probably in favor of ICE deporting people who are here illegally, but not necessarily in favor of like, the average person, not the average Republican, but the average person probably was not in favor of the way in which ICE was going about things in general. And so, if he were in the general right now, that messaging I think hits in a way that helps him. But I wonder, like, kind of positioning himself a little bit more as the moderate. Whether or not that hurts him in the primary and what his path is to win the primary. Obviously, he's got money. He can get in front of a camera. As you said, I think he's a very likable guy. I've had a number of conversations with him. Obviously, had him on the podcast. Asked him some tough questions, and I think he did a great job, answering those. But I think he may have an easier path potentially winning the general than winning the primary. That's the as we kind of talked about when we were talking about Rick Bennett, like the politically charged nature, like most of your Republicans don't want a moderate Republican, or most of your Democrats don't want a moderate Democrat. The people within the party want the more what I think some are labeling as extreme. I think it's appropriate to label the people on the left, the far left on the left, as extreme. I don't know that it's as appropriate on the right. We get labeled that way, but they also, I remember, just as an aside, when Mitt Romney was running for president, who is barely a Republican, and they labeled him basically like a right-wing radical. And it's like, okay, I don't think the people on the far right are actually that far right, but they're labeled that way. So either way, your party, most of your people within the party don't want a more moderate candidate, even though it's more likely that a moderate candidate has a chance to win the general. How does he emerge out of the primary?
Yeah, again, and that's why I think it's about building trust with voters. I think that's the big thing. He comes as an outsider who, like I was saying before, he's someone like Bobby Charles, like David Jones, who hasn't really run for, I guess David Jones has ran for governor before, but he hasn't run a real campaign before. He hasn't run, Jonathan Bush has never been a candidate. He's been in the business world where I think it's a wake-up call for a lot of businessmen or businesswomen, business people that get into politics to see how you're treated, to see how the press reacts to you, to see how much disinformation and misinformation is allowed to be spread about Republicans. And it's this targeted thing. So he's going to have to adapt to that. And I think he probably has a good background and good, connections around him to people who have experience with that. So I think that's kind of the pathway, but he's going to have to build trust because there are going to be a lot of Republicans who are going to vote in the primary. A lot of Republican primary voters have seen other Republicans that they'd supported say the right things to get a nomination and then abandon them when they get in office. I think that's, one of the things about Paul LePage is he is who he is. When he got into the Blaine House and the governor's office, he did what he ran on. Like he went and implemented them. I think that's what you're seeing from Donald Trump as president right now is he's executing the things that he said he was going to do if he got reelected. I think there are Republicans who have been left at the altar before where someone they gave the nomination to may not have continued to stand by what they said in the primary once they held office. And when you're an outsider that doesn't have a track record, you have to build trust and show that you're someone who's capable of that. And if you're only talking about business issues, I think there are probably Republican primary voters who care about the social issues. But again, you're right that if you're more moderate, you might have more capacity to appeal to some independents. I don't think that any Democrats are going to vote for a Republican. I think they're all at this point. And I can't say none because there are a few here and there, but I think that overwhelmingly, 99% of Democrats in Maine will not vote for a Republican candidate. So you need all the Republicans, and you need to be off some independents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the challenges we have as a party, I think, is I've heard differing views, numbers on this, but I'm pretty confident that the Republicans are behind independents and enrollment. Right? I think independents and Democrats are 1 and 2, and then Republicans are a little below. So we've got to do well with the independents and the unenrolled, or whatever you want to call them, unaffiliated.
Last time I said that, he said that it's the closest. The gap between the number of registered Democrats and registered Republicans is the closest it's ever been. And so,
yeah.
But and then there's the in Maine, the Green Party. In order to stay a political party, you have to maintain a certain number of people in your party. Like there's a minimum that you have to hit, and then you have to hit certain voter turnout thresholds for your major office candidates when they're on the ballot. The Green Party did this funny thing where they call themselves the Independent Green Party. And part of why I think they did it is that when people are registering to vote, it gives you the choice Republican, Democrat, or then it says Independent Green Party. There are a lot of people that register to vote accidentally as a Green Party member, thinking that they're picking the independent option. So there's some noise in the data. I think it's absurd that hasn't been fixed or changed.
Yeah, and then obviously there's the Libertarians, which tend to vote more conservative, and I think they're now called I think they're called the Liberal Party now. In Maine.
Because they sometimes they get DQ'd because they don't maintain, or they don't have enough people vote for the candidates. All right, so that's any more on Jonathan Bush? Or we
no. I think we're good there. Next, I think
he's one to watch, though. I think he's one to watch because I think he's going to have the money to make his case. And so it's really about whether he gains traction. If he starts to show momentum and he starts to show that he's gaining traction, and there are signs that you can point to that say that he's doing that, I think it propels him. He can start building momentum. He could be hard.
Yeah, no, I think there's a real path for him, and so next I think on the list would be Ben Midgley, who obviously similarly a businessman, ran one of the largest fitness companies the largest fitness company. He ran Planet Fitness, which I think was the previous largest, and then he kind of rebooted and took ownership of Crunch Fitness and led that. Grew up in Maine, lived on unemployment, not unemployment, it was food stamps at one point in his life, and started in the fitness industry. It's a fun story, right? Like he started in the fitness industry as a third job so that he could have gym membership, cleaning gym equipment, and eventually worked his way up to being the CEO of Planet Fitness, and the president of Planet Fitness, I think, and CEO of Crunch Fitness, and now running for office, and also has Lauren LePage as his campaign manager. So what's Midgley's path to victory?
Yeah, I think it's not unlike Jonathan Bush, except he doesn't have the name recognition, right? So he's an outside business person who's never run for office before. I'll tell you, I've met him a couple of times. He's probably the one that I know the least about, but he is such a nice guy, and he seems incredibly smart. When you talk to him, you get a sense that he thinks about things really deeply, that he analyzes them well. He seems like he's a quick study. I've said about him before, and I'll say again, I think he's the type of person that in the business world, in his prior life, didn't spend a lot of time thinking about policy. So a lot of these issues that he's approaching as a potential governor, he's approaching for the first time. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a thing. You've got to be a quick study. You've got to learn well. And he seems like he has the capacity to do it. I think having someone like Lauren LePage and that team with him is a big benefit because they do have the experience and are pretty well known and good at what they do. And I haven't met someone that's met Ben Midgley that hasn't personally liked him. He just seems like a very charming person. I think there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there to it because I think he is a very humble person. And sometimes people with a lot of humility have a hard time bragging about themselves and telling that story. Like you just told the story of him in the gym more powerfully than I've heard him say it sometimes because, again, he doesn't want to be boastful. He didn't do it for glory. He did it because that's what he wanted to do. He was a hard worker, and he built his career, and he built his business for all the right reasons. He's got a great family. He's a big community supporter. He's seen what's going on in some of the decisions being made in the schools, and I think part of that activated him. So I think he's doing it for the right reasons. I think he's a really nice guy. I think he's very smart. I think he's got good business instincts, and I think he's rounding out. I think if you look at the policy talk, he can speak very knowledgeably about many areas that I would guess a year ago he didn't have a position on. So I think he's very impressive in that. I think the big question is, how do you break through and get your name out? Now there are some signs that he is gaining traction. You see that, was it the York County straw poll that they had at their caucus? He emerged the top of that. Now he lives in York County, so I would hope that he would do well there, but it takes organization, and it takes having real support in order to kind of do that. I think there's some other areas where he's been showing it. He has good relationships, and he has an experienced team. So it's really for him going to be about getting known, getting seen, and being out there. And it's, again, for business people, it can be uncomfortable to all of a sudden have all this negativity pointed toward you. So he's going to have to show he can take a punch at some point, because it's coming. It's coming for everyone. And that's just how politics are. If not in the primary, then in the general, they're going to be, if you look at that story that got planted in the New York Times about Sean Moody, that was some like bogus, like, former employee accused of something, like, there was no really veracity to it, but because he was a Republican candidate, the New York Times will run with it. And so Ben Mitchell is going to have to show he can withstand that. And I imagine he can. And he has a great family, great foundation, but he's really going to get known for stuff. And I think he's going to have to show that he can go toe to toe with anyone on policy. I think those are the two things for him to prove. But, I think, Lauren is a great asset. She's been through statewide campaigns before. She's the National Republican Committee woman. So she also knows how to work with the RGA. If he becomes the candidate, she'll have great relationships to be able to help get the national support for his candidacy. But he really does need to do more to introduce himself, to have a clear message, and to show that he's on the same page with Republicans on policy.
Yeah, and I think in order to,
he has to make the case, right? That's where he's going to do it.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that you got to do that is, I think, getting out there in the social media space. I think and or television advertising, right? And I think he's got the capacity, to do that. I don't know which candidate has the most money or anything like that, but I know that obviously, having owned and sold Crunch Fitness, he has access to funds and has some capacity to self-fund. So I think that I think I would agree. One of the biggest problems is that he is not as well known. And I think that story, I think he's got to do more telling of that story in a way that's, he can remain humble. He's got to be who he is, right? Authenticity is important, and he is. That's one of those.
It's great quality, but again, you've got to be able to make the case. You've got to be comfortable doing it, and so that's going to be something for him to learn and to demonstrate.
Yeah, he's got a powerful story, and I just think telling it works, because I think, like, if he can get through the primary, right, like, that story, like, really makes him very relatable to middle of the road moderate voters. And so I think
you got to excite people. You've got to get them excited. So you've got to find the way to do it. Bobby Jindal had a great way of telling his story. Tim Scott has a great way of telling his story. Like, there are candidates you can look back to that, like, know how to introduce themselves and tell their story. Marco Rubio is another one. So you've got to he's got to nail that. I haven't heard him nail it yet. But he does. He's very likable, and he seems like a really person, again, of integrity and doing it for the right reasons. He's just going to show that he's got the ability to excite people. And if he does that, and he can kind of catch on, I think it'll be a big difference. And maybe it is. Maybe those early signs of winning the straw poll are evidence that he's doing that at the personal level. But to then do that at scale statewide, that's what you've got to expand on.
Right, 100%. Yeah, that's it. That's the challenge. So, especially in with all the Senate money that's being spent out there. So the next candidate, I think, on our list, I think we've covered Midgley and his path at this point, would be Owen McCarthy. So Owen McCarthy, obviously Maine boy. One of his slogan is that he grew up in Patton, Maine, and way up north, which I drove past recently on my way to and from Fort Kent. Way up there, and was able to start a company that received venture capital. Multiple. I think he's got a couple different companies, but one where they received like $60 million for this, like kind of like, I would say, groundbreaking in some ways, medical technology. So he's
Looking forward to. I really like Owen. I think Owen is really impressive, really great guy, really cool business that he started. I've known him for a long time. I've told him before, I think he should lean into the kind of Maha aspects of the thing that they do, because I'm probably going to get it wrong, but it's basically using music and vibrations to help with people with brain injury. And like, it's really fascinating. The science is fascinating. What they've been able to do with it is fascinating. And he's gone through the process of getting those therapies approved for, I think, insurance purposes and for government, all the safety trials and all of that. And so he's got a lot of interesting experience. He's done a great job leading that company. He's also been very active in the Maine business community. He was very active when I was overseeing education policy. He was, I think, on the board of visitors for the University of Maine system. And he's been very active in kind of the business ecosystem of kind of small business and economic growth here in Maine. And I think he has a real passion for it. So I think he comes across as, again, someone who's very smart, very authentic, very relatable. I think he can relate to almost anyone, despite the fact that he's so accomplished. So I think he's the type of energy that you like kind of want to be around, and you want him to be your friend. You want to go to his house for dinner, which I have done before. And so, Owen, if you're watching, thank you guys for having me over all those years ago. But I think the big question just is like, how do you stand out? How do you stand out? What's your superpower? What's the thing that makes you? What's your unique value proposition in this field? And I think the challenge he has is being in this lane, right? With Jonathan Bush, who's going to be a large presence because of his last name, because he's already kind of got name ID, and the businesses that, Athena Health and now whatever Jonathan has, Zeus, I think.
Zeus, yeah.
I think that, is a bigger business story than Owen's story. Same thing with Ben Midgley. So you got three guys touting themselves as kind of the business guy that's going to come in as an outsider, not a career politician. How do you differentiate yourself? And so that's really where Owen has to do it. And I think speaking about rural Maine is a part of it, but I would say the weakness in his presentation of that so far has been that he tells other people's stories to kind of approximate for his story. You've got to, you can't just talk about your friends and family that live there. You've got to show a deep connection and deep investment and deep knowledge. And I think he's got that. I think he has that. I just don't think he's figured out, again, how to break through and communicate it yet. So he needs to have a breakthrough moment. I feel like a broken record saying that about each of these people, but you've got to become known for something, and it's got to be more than a one note. It's going to be something that really inspires. And again, maybe because of my my past proximity to Governor Paul LePage, I always think about the LePage. When LePage emerged from that field in that crowded primary, it was the power of his story and who he was and what people could relate to and how he inspired them. And so I think that's where Owen needs kind of to define what his standout feature is, and he really got to nail it hard. Otherwise, I think he gets eclipsed by the two other juggernauts in his lane.
No, I think regardless of what lane people are in, one of the biggest problems is with all the different people that are running is figuring out how to most effectively differentiate yourself. Because when you look at a lot of the policy positions, I'm like, yep, I like almost all of them. I agree with them on many of the issues. And so it's about how do you stick out to the point where you can actually win the primary, and then going into the general, it's you have to build up that name ID to be able to get your independent and moderate voters.
The reason why I'm focusing so much on what lane they're in is, again, just it's helpful to me to organize, but it's also how people make decisions.
Right.
Like when you ask someone, where do you want to go for dinner? When they have all these possibilities in front of them, it's hard for them to narrow it down and pick something. But if you give them three choices, you say, do you want to go out for pizza or Thai food or or Indian or tacos, you give them those 4 choices, people can pick. They can say, oh, well, I really like tacos, but I'm more in the mood for pizza. But if you say, where do you want to go out for dinner tonight? People are like, oh, there's so many choices. They have decision fatigue. And so I think that as you're trying to make decisions, people could say like, oh, I want a candidate who is most in touch with the grassroots, or I want a candidate who has business experience. I want a candidate who has experience in government. Like that's kind of how you do it. And then you have to be the best in that lane. Now, maybe like there are other ways. People might like Owen McCarthy and they might like Bobby Charles. There are going to be lots of different ways that people pick across lanes and how they rank and whatever. I mean, this is another interesting feature that you and I have talked about personally before, which is this is a ranked choice election, right? This is there's the ability to rank and the requirement that the ballots are ranked choice ballots. But a lot of Republicans don't rank.
Right.
A lot of Republicans don't rank. So a lot of Republicans don't rank. So I think you do likely need to win on the first ballot in order to win overall when they do the ranked choice runoff thing. But there is the potential that this could end up being decided by ranked choice voting, which I then think causes a whole bunch of extra heartache for Republicans uniting after the winner.
Yeah, well, hopefully, like I think what I've heard from the candidates for the most part, I don't know if all of them have necessarily said this, is whoever wins this primary, we all need to get behind. So I think there's been a lot of broad support from the Republican candidates in this category. But I think that's one of the things that is incredibly important for us to be able to win, is to have this united front and not to get petty depending on if ranked choice voting has a substantial impact. I
think that honestly, like there's more than zero chance that, like, let's take the Democrats for instance, so that I'm not using anyone on the right as an example because they get upset when we do that. But let's say that you were to have a situation where Hannah Pingree were to have 39% of the vote on the first ballot, and Dr. Shah were to have 37% of on the next ballot on the first ballot, and then you have a situation where Dr. Shah just barely edges out Hannah Pingree by like a couple percentage points. You could see a situation where anyone who was ahead on the first ballot and loses on the second ballot does what Bruce Poliquin did and goes to court to try to challenge ranked choice voting. And you could see a lot of Republicans that don't like ranked choice voting cheering them along to say, maybe this will get it thrown out and never be used again. So you could see a principled reason for a candidate who is declared to not win, but was ahead on the first ballot, wanting to challenge the result and challenge ranked choice voting as a system. And so that could be messy. So I do think it is important that whoever wins, whoever is in the lead, hopefully can maintain that lead throughout, or be decisive. I think that was I really expected to see this happen 8 years ago, but then Sean Moody won with a majority on the first ballot, so it didn't ever come into play.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it comes into play here unless something dramatic happens between now and the primary, and you just never know. There's a lot of time between now and then. But hey, I do think that
Steve Robinson will get in the race and he'll clear the field, because I think if he running tomorrow, he would be the de facto. He is right now the party leader in many ways.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting comment, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've commented, and I'm going to be introducing him at the Lincoln dinner tomorrow. And one of the things that I'm gonna say is that, like, nobody has done more to help the Republican Party in the state of Maine than Steve Robinson and his incredible reporting outlining all of the fraud that's been happening. And so we are in Steve Robinson's debt here in the state of Maine at this point. But yeah, you're right. So something like that could happen. But I also think that you're right that most likely not a lot of Republicans are going to do ranked choice. And so hopefully we don't run into this situation where there's people being upset and challenging things, because the last thing that we need right now, it's already, as we've talked about, going to be challenging for a Republican to win a statewide election. For governor, that I think that we can't afford to have infighting during this time unless we would just want to hand it over to the Democrats. So let's hope that that doesn't happen. All right, so that's Owen. So the final, I guess I wouldn't say it's the final lane, but we'll say the insider lane. Let's start with Jim Libby. Obviously, Jim has served. He's in his fourth term in the Senate. He also served 2 terms in the House. Started back in the 90s, and then raised his family, then came back, has been in the Senate for the last this will be his 4th year. And in addition to that, he's been a teacher, business owner. When I say teacher, I mean a professor. He's one of that 1% of people in higher education that is a Republican and is a professor, teaching at Thomas College. I think he's been the dean or something like that there as well. Very
Thomas
and
College,
obviously,
by the way, a school that's focused on getting their students careers, putting them into jobs, not just liberal arts, but being skills focused and career focused, which I think is a really great school. And I think that certainly sets out well. Yeah. So he's in the people that have experience. He ran for governor before, right?
yeah, he ran. I'm trying to think way back. I think it was before even LePage. Might have been before LePage ran, so it might have been 2006 or whatever.
It was the year that Peter Chinquette was the nominee, so it was against one of the times that Baldacci won, I believe. But so I think Jim Libby, he, like I was saying before about Rick Bennett, he comes from a different era of what Maine politics was. And I think he remembers it that way. And things have changed a lot since then. And that's not at all an insult. It's just a statement of there used to be a system in which the Democrats were willing to work with Republicans and include them. And so there are some, Rick and Jim Libby among them, being people who still think that you can work with the Democrats in that same way. I think you can work with Democrats sometimes on some things. And I certainly, when I worked for Governor LePage, I had to work with Democrats, and I did very often, and was able to often get more done with them than I was working with some of the Republicans in the legislature. So I don't fault them for any of that. But I do think that when you're running a race like this, you have to have a good, bold sense of political realities. And I'm not sure that Jim Libby has quite adapted to the new world frame yet, because it is just so starkly different than the way the world worked the way politics worked, 20 years ago in Maine. It's crazy how much has changed. Or whatever year it was he was active before. I do think that he, again, is another really great guy. I think that's one of the things that I'm so struck in this field is you have so many people of character, and he certainly stands out as one. I think he's very thoughtful. He works very hard on areas like education. I think he's been focused on, AI and kind of the education of the future. I think he's seen what effective looks like at Thomas College. So I think that that's a really good lens to bring to it. He is, and I've been openly critical of, and I'm always openly critical of anyone who does do this. He's the only candidate that's taking advantage of the so-called clean elections program, which is the taxpayer-funded election program. I prefer that my tax dollars don't go to fund campaigns. And I also think that the ability to raise money from the public is a sign of viability. To have people excited enough about you to be willing to actually write you a check, I think says something. And so I think it's an important piece of data in an election. But I understand there are people that disagree with that. And he's chosen that he thinks it's better to focus, instead of calling people to ask them for large checks and only focus on that, he wants to focus on his campaign and on that. It's a different decision. I think that's a tough one in a Republican primary. He's the only Republican doing it. Garrett Mason did that last time and last go round, and he came in second in that field. And I don't think he believes that he suffered any negative consequences for that, although he did have to spend a lot of time defending it. But Garrett had in the legislature spent a lot of time fighting against that very program, and then to use it seemed a little bit at odds with his prior positions. But again, there's an argument that he doesn't make the rules. He fought for the rules he wanted, and now that the rules are in place, those are the ones you play by. So I get that. So I don't love the clean elections angle personally. I think that's something you have to overcome. But if you're trying to appeal to moderates and independents, the clean elections program in Maine is very, very popular. Every time that voters have had a chance to weigh in to either approve it or to repeal it, they've sided with clean elections every time. And so I think it's here to stay, and I think it's popular. So I think in the general electorate, it probably helps with independence and with independents, right? Because I don't think Democrats are voting for a Republican. So I think that's helps him with the general election if he makes it there. So how do you make your case in a Republican primary? What is the case for Jim Libby? I don't know that I see it, right? I think there's the case that is I know how to get work done in Augusta. I've done it. I just don't think that argument sells in a Republican primary. I don't think that that's an argument that people are hungry for. A lot of people are looking at what's been going on in Augusta as a problem. So to like run on, like, I know how Augusta works, like, I personally am one of the people who thinks that's a very important skill to have. I think not knowing how Augusta works, not having ever served there, is a liability. And it's very important for whoever becomes governor to have people that work for them that have worked in government before and know the language, because it really is a foreign language. Budgets and finance don't work in state government the way that you would think that they would, coming from the outside, coming from a business background. It's a thing to learn. And when you become governor, you have to do that on day one. You have to submit your budget before the legislature starts. And so you really, like, from the time you get elected in November to the time that you have to submit your budget in January or February, and with inauguration happening in January, like, I mean, there's no time. And that's the first budget is the most consequential thing a governor does. Now, there's the ability to change the budget. So you submit a first proposal and then you can come with an amendment to it, which is often referred to as the change package. But it's something you got to do really quick. And so someone that's been there before, that knows the people and knows the players, knows who to hire and who not to hire, that sort of stuff, like that, I think is an advantage. Has relationship, has run a campaign before. Now he has run campaigns before. I think that's one of the big things for him. So once he gets his funding, if he gets the required $5 contributions, I think he'll have a financial advantage, and he'll need to, again, stake out who he is, what's the pitch for him, and what's the case for Jim Libby. And I do think that so far the argument is that he's got the education background. That's an important thing. And that he's thinking about the future of the Maine economy and the future, that he's done it before, and he knows how Augusta works. So I think that's his argument. I just think that's a hard one to break through in a primary audience. I think that it's in this lane, you have a very strong candidate in Garrett Mason who's going to be making a similar argument about experience and competence that makes it hard for Jim Libby to break out and break through. But again, I think he's a really nice guy. I think that if he were to be governor, he would be leaps and bounds ahead of what we've got now in Janet Mills. I just question how you sell that in a primary.
Well, I think again, we've got a ton of candidates. I think it's hard to differentiate and stand out. And I think I agree. I mean, Jim's obviously with an education background. I mean, we need to fix our education system, right? Like it's broken, and it's one of the biggest problems. But like, I don't think we necessarily win on education, right? I think that's one of the challenges. So I do think that, like, if he, assuming he gets his $5 contributions, because I think you have to get like somewhere around 3,200 in that. And I'll actually, to talk about that for just a moment, I agree with the motto that, like, this is the system. Let's use the system to the best of our advantage. And if this is the best way, let's go for it. I actually have run. Geez, sorry. When I was running for State House, right? I ran the first time I started out running clean, and then I backed away from it because I actually thought that it would be easier for me to raise money.
Than it is.
Well, no, it would be easier to raise money than doing the $5 thing.
The rules,
yeah. Because, like, getting people to give $5 contributions, you'd think it's something that's really small, but so many people are resistant to it, partly because Republicans don't like this. And that's and so it's really, I think it's actually even more challenging than actually just going out there and raising money. I think if you can get 3,200 people to give $5 contributions, that's like incredible. Yeah. And so, like, obviously, if he can do that, it comes with a lot of money, and having access to money will give him the ability to, I think, differentiate himself and get his name out there. But yeah, I like Jim, great guy. I think, again, one of the challenges in this is I like a lot of the candidates.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're all really great.
I
great
think
guys.
It's great that they're willing to put themselves out there. I think that they're shaping the debate. I think there's an important, role to play. And again, if he gets if he qualifies, has enough donations to be able to get allotments from the program, I see him staying until the end as well, right? So why not? He'll probably make it to election day.
Yeah. So again, my brain went a different direction, but we're gonna move on. So we'll move on. So that's Jim, and now Garrett, the final person to enter the race, in Garrett Mason. I think the final. I don't think anybody else is going to declare, but Garrett Mason, obviously.
When is the deadline to get on the ballot? In March sometime. So we got a little bit of time. People could. I don't think anyone expects anyone else to get in. I think, Sean Moody didn't say that he wouldn't get in, but he said that he was taking time to evaluate personal health, and that seemed to suggest that he's out.
Yeah.
So I think Garrett Mason, I think, is probably the most interesting of the candidates that we're going to talk about in terms of breaking down kind of his pathway, because he did wait the longest to get in, but he's kind of been in the mix since the beginning. So with the first debate that they had, I think you call it a debate, right? The first event.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think they might not have called it a debate, but that's what I call it. So
there's one there. There's one at Dunegrass, right? He was there for some of the Republican candidate forums for governor from the beginning. So it wasn't a surprise to anyone that he was thinking about it. And Garrett, of course, ran before. He's always been very open about the fact that he would like to be governor someday. Always, since he ran for the state house the first time in the state Senate, where he served as the Republican leader in the Senate. So when Governor LePage got reelected, Garrett was in the majority in the Senate, and Mike Thibodeau was Senate president. And then behind Mike Thibodeau, because once you're Senate president, you preside over the whole Senate, then there's the Republican leader. So he was the majority leader in the Senate. So he has a lot of experience. He knows a lot about how government works. I think he's making a very powerful case that I find compelling to me about the fact that he'd be ready to govern on day one. And I think that's absolutely true. He knows how the legislative district races work, because he had to do that when he was managing them as the Republican leader in the Senate. He had to care about the map, so he knows the districts very well. He has a great organizing structure there. He also has done it in his political business that he and his partner Keith Herrick have. And I think Kathy Summers Grace, I don't know if she's still involved, but they have a really, lot of wealth of experience in running campaigns for legislative candidates in districts all across Maine. I think Garrett's very politically connected. He has a lot of great relationships and a lot of experience, especially for how young he is. And so that gives him a lot of strength coming in about how that works. A lot of those things I just said, though, and then what I said about, I find it very attractive to me that he talks about being able to govern on day one. I don't know that that's a winning message in a Republican primary. So I think he's got to get more interesting with his messaging. Not interesting, meaning what he's saying is interesting, but he needs to talk about things that have a more broader appeal. Because as I was saying before with Jim Libby, I think that saying, making the competence argument, while it matters, it certainly is a real legitimate thing that I think is important to whoever is governor. I don't know that that's a thing that people are going to vote based on necessarily. So yeah, they want someone who can be effective on day one, who knows how to counter. But I think selling yourself as a government insider, someone with a wealth, that also is one of those double-edged swords. Like, you're describing yourself as a bit of a career politician, which is, a shame to say in Maine, because the legislature barely gets paid, right? He wasn't in the legislature for the money, but it does attract people that do it because they want attention or they want to be important. And I think those are the types of attitudes that Mainers have about the idea of being a career politician. So I think if you say too much of that, you maybe don't break through in the way that you need to in order to talk about what you would do with that experience if you were there. So I think that's where his messaging needs to be focused. And I think that that's really compelling. He does have a depth of relationships of people who know him and like him and have worked with him before. And as one of the only candidates in this group that's run for office and won office before, I think it gives him a major leg up against everyone. And he's run for governor before, and the most recently of anyone in the batch that's done it. And he came in second in the primary. Now, I do contend that he was really probably like the third strongest candidate, but Sean Moody and Mary Mayhew drew from the same group of people. A lot of people that supported Paul LePage also then would have supported Mary Mayhew had Sean Moody not been there. So I think Garrett probably still might have lost to Mary Mayhew at that time because she had just a bigger profile. And she was more closely associated with LePage, but with Sean Moody coming in and taking the LePage lane, it dropped her down to third, and Garrett came in second. So I don't think you should take anything for granted in terms of being, the candidate in waiting from last time. Before he was a known, I was going to say pedophile, but what do you call people that are caught with kiddie porn?
Yeah.
Before he was a known exploiter of children for sexual deviancy, Elliot Cutler, the first time that he ran for governor, he came within an inch of his life of beating Paul LePage. And he was the independent. And then when he ran for governor the second time, he did polling that showed that no one really remembered him from the time before. And he was shocked by it. He thought that he would have 4 years later this residual group of people that were waiting for him. And he had to reintroduce himself all over again and spend all this money. He did worse the second time than he did the first time, partially because, Mike Misha was a stronger candidate than what's her name, Libby Mitchell. So I think Garrett can't take for granted that just because people supported him last time, they'll be there for him this time. But again, he was, organizing for Ted Cruz in Maine in 2016, and he has a good network from that. He organized for his gubernatorial run before 8 years ago, so he's got experience from that. He's got great relationships everywhere from his work in political consulting and lobbying, so he knows everybody, and he probably has the biggest leg up when it comes to organization and apparatus behind him. So it's really on him to have the money and the messaging to break through, and have people kind of pick him first. And I don't think that it's in the populist lane. So I don't know what the key message is that differentiates him. Maybe it's some sort of like return to, traditional values for Republicans. I don't know what the message is there. I haven't heard it from him yet. Maybe he's decided it and he's got it. But I think the thing that he's pitching right now is important. It's important for me as someone who's worked in government before and knows how difficult it is for well-intentioned people coming from the outside to actually not get blocked by everyone inside the government. So I think it's a really strong argument. I just don't know that it's one that propels him to the front. He does apparently has a lot of financial backing that will be coming from outside. I think a lot of people have heard that. And there's already been announced spending that's going to be happening on his behalf from an outside group. And there are commercials on the air right now from him, which is the earliest of anyone. And so I do think that there's an emphasis a lot of times on like digital and social media, but I would say do not underestimate the power of TV. TV is broad, and if you have enough money to be on TV and you hit the right spots and you know what you're doing, you can increase name ID very quickly. And then he has to just kind of show who he is, what he's about. I do think, like the other folks that we've been talking about, he is going to have to answer the question of how he wins in a general, what his pathway is there. I do think that he is a very well-defined traditional conservative, and that's going to be easy for Democrats to portray as far right. That's what they, like you were saying, they lie about everyone. Right. They'll make you extreme, even if you're not. And Garrett's certainly someone that's worked with both parties in the past and can make a good argument about that. But he's going to have to, have a real clear pathway. And I'm sure he has one. I'm sure he's got a plan. But he's going to have to make that case that he can win statewide, because he's won in a district that I know I think he says he flipped it, and I think he did flip it. But Lisbon is a pretty strong, we used to call it LePage country. There were a lot of LePage voters in that district. And so running for what was for him an easily winnable seat, maybe divided, but not as fiercely divided as the rest of the state. He's going to have a broader appeal, and he's going to have a pathway for that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. In what's interesting too, and I think having access to money to be spent on you, there's a couple of things that you've said there that I think are really, really important. I do think social media plays a role, specifically in the future. And I think what the problem with social media and kind of how this is corrected with television is that largely, even when you're paying, social media is going to put more stuff in front of people that already want to see. But also, you can easily, if you get an ad on Facebook, it's as you're scrolling, or it's a reel, you can quickly and easily skip that. When you're dealing with television ads, that's a lot harder. And so I do think that there's more value, but I also think we sometimes forget how old of a population we have here in the state of Maine, and how many of those older people are still getting most of their information from the television, and so I think it's probably one of the best places to reach people, which again, it's important to start now, because as you had mentioned with the Senate race, I think it's going to be challenging. So having access to that, and again, as with all these candidates, becoming known and differentiating yourself. I think, as I've talked to average Joes out there, even people who are more conservative, one of the problems I think we have as a party is that people are much more focused on national politics than they are on local politics. So people are largely ignorant on what's actually happening. And I know people that are strongly conservative who have no idea who the candidates are. And they want to know. And I've said, oh, well, I got a podcast coming up you should watch. We're gonna talk about a lot of the Republican candidates, but then there's also episodes that I've done with the other candidates. But there's that challenge, going back to what you said about the Elliot Cutler situation of like people forgetting. So with somebody like Garrett, like very few people in of the average Republicans out there actually know who any of the candidates are, let alone let alone Garrett. So they all have to overcome that in some way in winning the primary, and then obviously.
An interesting thing there too, I would point out is, so someone that's been in the legislature before, a secret asset that they have that the general public takes for granted is the relationships with the people they served in the legislature with, who were like in their party and in their caucus, and how helpful that is in organizing and introducing yourself around the state. And so I think that was a big difference maker for Jared Golden in his primary against Lucas St. Clair. Lucas St. Clair had much more money, Roxanne Quimby's son, they had the Burt Bees fortune. The reason that Jared was able to beat Lucas was because his colleagues in the legislature, the Democrats that he served with when he was assistant majority leader in the House, he relied on his network of colleagues from the legislature to help him win and to take him around and to introduce him. And Garrett has that. I'm sure Jim Libby does to some extent as well, probably the people he served with originally and probably some of the people he's serving with now in the legislature. But Garrett certainly has it from a lot of his colleagues when he was in the state Senate. And I would think that that's a big asset as well, in addition to the kind of media landscape. Because I think Maine too, like there is a sense of, because Maine is so interconnected and we have a relatively small population, it's not hard. It's quite often that you will, if you haven't met the candidate yourself or if you haven't seen them, and a lot of people will have, they will have gone to something and seen a candidate, you'd like to talk to someone who has, and someone that's known them, someone that's seen them. You like to know that they've been in your town. One of my pet peeves is, and I've seen it from several of these candidates, not Garrett, but some of the others, where they'll tell a story about how they just went to Aroostook County. And it's clear that that's the first time ever going to Aroostook County, and they went because they're running for governor. And now, when I was a kid, we went to Aroostook County like a couple times. I wouldn't say I had a lot of experience there. I did a lot of work when I worked for the governor on issues in Aroostook County, and I spent a lot of time up there with the school leaders and with some businesses and working on some hard issues up there. But you need to have those relationships and have a real relationship with these different places in the state. You can't just say like, oh, let me tell you about Aroostook County because I went there once I decided I was going to run for governor. Like that really doesn't sound great. And so I think Garrett's got a bit of an advantage of having the relationships in all of the different parts of the state and having well-connected people who are likely willing to work for him and help introduce him to their friends and family. So I think Garrett comes in with a lot of strong advantages that other candidates don't have. And I think it gives him a leg up in this lane. The question is, I don't think he comes off as the most populist. I think that he probably has got to find his footing on how he talks about Donald Trump. I haven't heard it yet. Like he's not trying to do the Bobby Charles thing where he's trying to be the Trumpiest candidate in the room. He has been closely aligned with Trump in the past. He helped plan the visit that they had to Garrett's district where they actually, I think maybe his I don't know if it was his school, but the school he went to, but I think he went to a private Christian school in Lisbon when Trump came here. I think he has been very closely allied with the administration and probably has some good relationships there. So I think finding out how you talk about that and how you also do it in a way that gives you some room in the general to not be vulnerable to the anti-Trump movement that's coming because it's the midterms. And when I say anti-Trump movement, I mean from the independent vote and the how the left is going to spin, whether the candidate is Hannah Pingree or Angus King III or Dr. Shah or Shenna Bellows, they're all going to try to paint. They're going to make a lot of their campaign being about standing up to Trump, and there are going to be independents that you're going to need to win.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. So let's move on. I don't know if you want to say how much to say about Ken Capron. You put him in the doesn't have a chance category.
Yeah, and I again, I don't mean any disrespect by that. I've known Ken for a long time. He calls into my radio show. He I think he is a man that believes what he says. And I think he's doing, he's putting out the ideas that he thinks are important. He's put his name on the ballot several times for several different types of offices. And I think it's great for him to continue to be out there and to raise issues that he thinks are important. And so I think that his is largely a symbolic candidacy. I think he probably believes that he has a chance, and you have to if you're going to put yourself out there. And so I commend him. Go ahead, stay as long as you want. I just think that he is at a stage in his life where he's probably, doesn't have as much energy to organize a huge campaign. And he doesn't seem like he's raised a bunch of money. He doesn't seem like he's got a huge following. So I think he's, again, someone that will be able to influence what the candidates talk about, but I don't know how you break through to some of the more established candidates that have more money, bigger name ID, and an infrastructure. So I think he's a well-intentioned person. I like Ken personally, really, really have good conversations with him, but I just don't see him being able to break through in this field.
Yeah, I think one of the challenge, obviously the challenge with so many candidates, and you do need to have a strong grassroots, strong organization behind you, and I think it's hard to have that when there are so many other candidates that are grappling for that. Yeah. So let's maybe quickly, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. We're already quite a ways into this, but talk about the Democrat candidates.
When I fell into the alley, people are always like, I don't know how you do 4 hours. And I'm like, I can talk forever. See, it's hard.
me too. But yeah, so on the Democrat side, it seems like we've got 4 candidates that are the primary ones that we can talk about, with Hannah Pingree, Shenna Bellows, Angus King III, and Troy Jackson. I don't know if that's the order that I should put them in, but I think that from a lot of people that I've heard, Hannah Pingree has been referenced as being the apparent front runner, but I don't know if you see it that way. But what about her? What's your analysis there on the Democrat side for Hannah?
So Hannah Pingree probably has a similar argument to what I just made about Garrett Mason, but on the other side, she has the most experience in Maine politics of any of them, and the most leadership. I mean, it's tough though, and we'll talk about Shenna Bellows and Troy separately, because Troy's been Senate president, Hannah's been Speaker of the House, Shenna's been Secretary of State, and she was a state senator. But so I think they all have their own claim. And then Dr. Shah has been the CDC director. And so I think Dr. Shah is actually the one that I'll probably spend more time talking about. But Hannah Pingree, I think, she has the most experience in the executive branch, running a lot of the government alongside Janet Mills. And so I think that she comes across as the most kind of strongest manager of the bunch, the most very experienced. She'll have the relationship she had when she was Speaker of the House, like I was saying earlier about Garrett. Though it was a while ago, so those are kind of, people tend to move and retire or whatever, so it's not as strong and as recent as Garrett's, but it's still there. She also, though, has her mom, who is the congresswoman for Maine's 1st District, and so she has a lot of benefit of the relationships that her mom has, both from a financial fundraising standpoint and also from an organizing standpoint. So I think she starts with some built-in advantages there. She's going to have to differentiate herself from Janet Mills. I don't think that there's an appetite to run as the 3rd term of Janet Mills, either on the far left. I think the far left wants a break. Janet Mills was seen in many ways as frustrating the more progressive wing of her party. There were a lot of things that she didn't go along with. There were bills that she vetoed that they're not happy about. And so Hannah's going to have to show them to win the primary, kind of how she'll do it. But she also, made her name on a lot of the green initiatives and the sustainability plans. And she's a key architect of policies that have caused Maine's energy prices to go up faster than any other state in the country. And so she'll have to answer for that. But that could get her brownie points in the primary. So she's going to have to do that. I think she doesn't come off with a lot of the populist talking points. She does have another benefit to her that I like, in the same way that I like it. I was going to mention it earlier of some of the other candidates on the right, is we have a lot of people with young families that are running for governor, right? Jim Libby's kids are now a little bit older, but they're, still kids. They're still young people. Garrett Mason has a young family. You have some people, and Hannah Pingree is now one of them that has young kids. And I think people like that. I think people like seeing a governor that has an investment because of their family and because they're doing it for their kids and the vision they have. So I think she can contrast that to Shenna Bellows, who I don't believe has young children, or doesn't have that story. And Troy Jackson, his kids are older, so Troy is all about Troy. I don't think Troy is doing it for his young family. And I think I don't know anything about Nirav Shah's family or Angus King III, so maybe there's a story there. But I think there's an interesting story for Hannah. So I think she does have a lot of those institutional advantages, similar to what I was talking about with Garrett, with outside political relationships, outside financial backing, experience in the legislature. Her mom being in Congress now, I think, is probably more of a benefit for her on the left. In a general election, it's going to be liability for some people, but again, in CD1, that's great.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Struggles in CD2. I think that's where rural Maine and people that are having to that are worried about the affordability issue. That's where Hannah's going to have a real challenge.
Well, I definitely see Republicans winning CD2. That's what I say definitely, but that's what I would suspect. CD1 is going to be more challenging, and obviously, again, connected to her mom is both a asset and a liability. As her mom continues to be in office for she's been there for a long period of time, doesn't do a lot of appearances, but I think overall name recognition is a huge asset in any kind of election, again, because people aren't paying as much attention, and she's obviously younger, much younger than her mom. And so but I think most of what the liberals are upset with Pingree about are not her stances, but that can't we get somebody other than an older person to be in office? I think that's
right. And when you're looking at Mills and Collins and LePage and Angus King, right, the average age among them is what? I mean, they're all over
70 something. Yeah. I mean, Angus, I think, is 80 at the moment. And I think the others are a couple of the others are close to that. So, moving on, I think the next one that we could consider, I want to consider Shah last, would be Shenna Bellows. To me, like, I definitely think that I await your analysis, obviously, but I think that she's got a strength in the Democrat primary of being
the anti-Trump.
The anti-Trump, and just I'm willing to do anything politically, even if it's obviously wrong, if it's something that Democrats like. Yeah, and so I think that's her strength. I think that makes her probably maybe the weakest candidate in the general election on the Democrat side, but strong in the primary.
Yep, I agree.
All right, nothing else. That's it. We're done.
I think that's it. I think she runs the anti-Trump candidate, and that's going to help her a bit in the primary, and it's going to hurt her a bit in the general.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I don't think we necessarily need to spend a lot of time. I mean, you can kind of differentiate these two, but I think Troy Jackson and I have a couple thoughts about.
So Troy Jackson, I actually think is interesting because Troy Jackson is in the socialist lane, like that is its own lane. And that's an ascendant lane right now with Graham Plattner, with Donnie. Like, it is growing, and there is a real effort on the socialists' behalf to take over the Democrat Party apparatus and infrastructure. We've seen it play out in Portland. It is, and people used to think that the word socialist was meant as like an insult. Like, no, there are actual people who consider themselves socialists, and they want to take over the Democrat Party to advance socialism. That's their goal. And they believe that it's just and moral and all this other stuff. So he thinks that that's an ascendant lane. And so he really does have his own constituency. And I think it's a different constituency. I think it's a lot of the people that were frustrated with Janet Mills because she wasn't far enough left. So I think those are the people that are not going to vote for Hannah Pingree type candidate. And I think it's different than the Shenna Bellows just, knee-jerk anti-Trump people. I think it's people that really want to see socialism, and it's a more populist argument. So I do think that Troy is trying. Now, I just don't know that he has as broad of appeal as a Graham Plattner does, because Troy's been around forever. He's been Senate president. He's been.
Well, he also he doesn't sound nearly as masculine as Graham Plattner. He just has that booming voice, and he is Graham Plattner. I don't like him. He's scary. He frightens me. In the general, again, like if he's able to win the primary, because he has that broad appeal. He's very charismatic, and I don't necessarily see that out of Troy.
Yeah. So I think that's Troy's thing. But Troy, former state Senate president, got the relationships. He has the connection with, the Bernie campaign. He was the chair of Bernie for president in Maine. So he's got some connections. He's got some strength there. So it'll be interesting. I think those are the different kind of like groupings and lanes. And then Angus King III, I don't really know that much about. So I don't know what he's doing. I don't know how he's campaigning. And I have the least insight into that one. His biggest thing is, in the polling, at least, people saw the name Angus King, and I assume they thought it was his dad. And so I think he polls well early, but I think that's going to be hard to maintain. But again, if he's able to use his dad's apparatus and infrastructure and make an argument that he can appeal to independents, maybe that's a lane for him. But I think he's probably got the most challenging path forward.
Well, I definitely think one of the other elements that I think impacts both him and Troy is in kind of a Democrat ideology mindset, right? White men are bad. Women and minorities are good, right? And so I think there is like an inherent challenge. I think even if you cut everything else out, that I think would make it more challenging. Obviously, he does have that name.
That Troy didn't get into the CD2 race. I think it's more likely that a Democrat will be governor than a Democrat will beat Paula Page in the 2nd congressional district for Congress. So I guess maybe that's the calculation, that if you can win the Democrat primary for governor, then you can be governor. But if you're the Democrat candidate against LePage is probably still going to win. So maybe that's why he didn't do it. But I mean, all of the candidates there right now are white male Democrats. And so you would have thought that he'd have the appeal there. You're looking at Matt Dunlap, you're looking at Joe Baldacci, and you're looking at Jordan Woods, who jumped from the Senate race over to that one to try to reinvent himself again. So it'll be interesting, but that's where I think Troy might have used that you just mentioned to his advantage in that field. But because it worked, and it's funny because the last go round too was Jared and Lucas St. Clair, both white men as well from the Dems. Yeah.
So, and I think that makes sense. And I was actually expecting Troy to jump over as well. But I guess the appeal of being governor was too great to resist. And I think you have he does have.
There are like 185 people in the legislature, something around that number. And when you go up to the third floor, the governor's office on the second floor, the third floor is where the legislature is. And the joke was always, when you say the word governor, when you go up to the third floor, you say the word governor, 185 heads turn, because they've all like pictured. And if you've been in the legislature, you realize the difference of occupying that office, the weight of the office.
Yeah. So the last candidate that we'll consider today, is because we kind of did Rick Bennett at the beginning, so I don't think we need to go back to him. But is Nirav Shah, who I think a lot of people aren't really seriously considering. It looks like he's going to be the first Democrat. He has announced that he was the first Democrat to collect his signatures. I don't know if he's got them certified yet.
So I think he's interesting too, because he's never run for office before, as far as I know. I predicted that he would run for governor back when we were still on lockdown. And so I'm not surprised that he's in. I'm surprised he waited so long to announce. I think if he had gotten in sooner, he would have had a lane to himself, and he would have been building an inevitability that would have probably complicated the path for Hannah Pingree. I think he and Hannah Pingree kind of pull from a similar voter. And so I'll be interested to see how that plays out over time. I do think that he has a couple different strengths. One, he starts out with the biggest name ID of anyone now that he's in the race. And I think that was reflected in recent polling that showed him in the front of the pack for those. So he starts out with almost universal name ID in the state of Maine, which would be really hard for anyone else who'd never run for governor for office before. But because he was CDC director and he was basically in charge of the state during COVID, and Janet Mills disappeared, right? And she just let him have the press conferences every day where he got to decide what the law. He was basically acting governor in many ways because they let CDC be in charge. There are a lot of people who, different people have different opinions now of how this all played out. But there are people who think that Dr. Shah was a godsend and an expert and trust the experts. And he saved lives during COVID. And there's like, the older population that probably still like him. So I think he has that built in. And then he has this expertise thing. And I think on the left, there's this whole orthodoxy around trust the experts, turn to the experts. And so I think that, that plays in with part of the primary field. And then in the general, I think there's still probably that overhang too with independence of those two things that I said that are true. Yeah. I think we'll see how he keeps up on fundraising because he's never had to do it before. But I think he has a bit of celebrity to him. And then he's going to have to fill in his policy proposal. And I haven't been paying close attention to what he's saying and what he's talking about. But on the stuff that's not public health related, he's going to have to do it. I made the analogy the other day. He reminds me a bit of Elizabeth Warren because when she first entered politics, her only background was in like consumer finance. Those were the issues she had spent the most time on. She created the proposal for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. When I was at Harvard Law School, she was a professor of bankruptcy law, and she was an expert on kind of consumer bankruptcy. And those were the issues that she was most passionate about. And for everything else, it's like she had never thought about it. And so she just called all of her Harvard professor socialist friends and said, oh, tell me what to believe. And then she just kind of filled it in. I think that's what's unknown right now about Dr. Shah is what are his full set of priorities for everything. But you have to imagine that it's going to be somewhat similar to Hannah Pingree. He did serve at the Biden administration. He left Maine to go down and be in big CDC. And I'm sure he's got a lot of connections to kind of the national party as well. So I think that'll be the interesting thing to see. But I wouldn't sleep on him. I think that he's a real contender there. I think that he probably hurts. I think he probably pulls both from the support for Hannah Pingree and from Shenna Bello. So it just complicates the race.
Yeah, and I think he also, I would suspect, like because of how ranked choice plays in, right, that there's a really good chance that he gets a lot of, I think he'll get enough first place votes he might get enough to be like the leader anyway. But like, I also think that second place votes, I think he'll probably be the leader in second place votes, if not, because I think that, yeah, I think that there's a lot of not many people dislike him, right? Outside of conservatives, right? Yeah. Right. On the left, they love him. And even in the middle, I think one of the things you commented on is something that I've seen too, is like one of the reasons that I think it didn't make sense for conservatives when LePage ran in 22, and even still to hit like as much as I think that what we did during the lockdown during COVID-19 was bad, and I think the data, if we look at it now, we can see that the stuff that he did, because he kind of was essentially governing, were not good, and that Maine maybe initially looked like it was doing better, but then they stopped reporting on it once we started to go bad. And nobody, because that wasn't reported by the mainstream media, very few people, unless you're going and looking for the data, recognize that the actions that were taken by the Mills administration under the direction of Nirav Shah, though they were really bad for our economy and for mental health and for other forms of health and for education and all that other kind of stuff, they stopped reporting on it. And so people don't know about it, right? And so they still think they have that memory of the early days of COVID where Maine did good because of, they thought her policies, when in reality, it probably had a lot more to do with the fact that we're rural. And so but people
we were close together, but then what did we do? We did nothing to prevent people from coming in and bringing it with them. We did nothing to keep our people safe. What we did is we shut down everything. We shut down people's livelihoods. We took away the things that kept people safe and healthy and happy. And it's, yeah, I mean, again, we can imagine that a lot of people that were making those decisions were well-intentioned and trying to do what they thought was right, but it was ridiculous.
Yeah, and I mean, like one of the biggest ones that I just want to hammer is like the people who their loved ones passed away by themselves without, because because of this, like the nonsense, your mother, your father, your grandmother who you couldn't go and see, and they died alone. And then all the businesses that were destroyed as a result of it. There's so many businesses, which is like livelihood. This is one of the things that annoyed me about the COVID days is they tried to say that the Republicans only care about the economy, whereas Democrats, we care about people's lives. And it's like, the economy is people's lives. Like people's ability to put food on their table, their ability to pay their bills, their ability to support their family is an economic question. So that's what I have to, but I do think that there's a lot of people who like him. Again, a lot of people don't realize this because they're not as in the weeds as you and I may be, and even some of the people listening. And so,
it also identifies the challenge of, like, let's say Dr. Shah is the nominee on the left.
Mhm.
If the Republican nominee is someone that people have never heard of before, it just
Right.
makes the Republican candidate seem less serious. It makes them seem less viable. And so that's what some of these candidates that you and I say we like, like an Owen McCarthy or Ben Midgley, who are really good business people that no one's ever heard of. You put them up against Dr. Shah, people's presumption is the person you've heard of before is going to be the one that wins. And you've got to do a lot of work to overcome that. And you've got to really define yourself in such a way that makes you the better choice and the better option versus the person people have already heard of before.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on. It's been a great conversation. I think we covered, we covered all the candidates that I mean, there are some other independents that I don't think are, I don't even remember their names. And I think there might be one other person who had initially declared up in Bangor on the Republican side, but I've not caught his name. And so I just thank you for taking the time. It's been a great conversation. I think for people who are watching, I think they learned about like a little bit more about about the race. And with so many candidates, I think something like this is why I wanted to do it. I think it's very helpful for people who want to be able to get a snapshot without necessarily having to listen to every single one of the podcasts that I've done with all the candidates.
Well,
so
the big important thing I think to take away from it too is that there's still time for things to change, but like with the field seemingly defined now at this point, like this is when you're going to have to start to see candidates like making their move and figuring out what they're going to do to stand out and how they're going to differentiate themselves, how they're going to build momentum. It's all about momentum. Now you want to have the momentum at the right time. And there's still a lot of time left between now and June when this happens. And what are the big things that are going to happen? Like not much, right? Legislature's in session right now. There goes my Augusta background. I guess. But the legislature's in session, so they'll get like the most attention for now, I guess. But there's really not a lot of like intervening events that could really shake things up. So it's on the candidates to be able to do it themselves. They've got to find a way to really reach people and to break through the noise and have a reason to kind of catch in. So I think there's a lot that can. Oh yeah, here we go, my TV. There's a lot that can. There's a lot. Well, if you have one big moment, right? If you have one big thing that you do, if there's one big scandal, if there's one big viral moment that, and the positive, that could reshape things. And so
sure.
I think none of this is fully defined yet. And so there's a lot of opportunity for each of them to change the way the field is, but it's gonna take something big to really kind of redefine it. So it's gonna be this big thing, and I think it's not happening in Augusta. I think Augusta now, is all focused on Janet Mills, and it's the Janet Mills show. I think you got the Republicans in the legislature trying to figure out what they can do to have any sort of relevance there. So, and then with the national media covering Donald Trump and the Democrats wanting to talk about Trump nonstop, I think that's kind of, it's going to be hard for people to have a defining moment. But anyone that can break through, that can go viral for the right reasons, or if there's a scandal for the wrong reasons, like those are the things that could really reshape the field. But someone finding out like what is the messaging that's resonating with voters right now, and not just doing, the same thing that everyone else does. Like that's going to be what makes the difference. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be watching for. I'll also be watching on I think the fundraising matters. I think who has the money is going to matter, but I think the only people exempt from that are going to be likely Jonathan Bush, because he's just known to have access to money and he could probably self-fund his whole campaign. So I think he's probably exempt from that. Ben Midgley, I don't know the extent of his personal fortune, so I don't know if he can fully fund or would be willing to do it. And then I think there is the expectation that Garrett Mason already has lined up the outside political financial support. But for the other candidates, it's going to be very important to know what's happening with how they're able to raise money and build the war chest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again. Great analysis. But again, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is I think you have a pretty good sense of all this. You've been involved in the political realm, commenting on it, and I think I think that you see something that I'm not necessarily hearing from other people on a lot of this analysis. And
that could mean I'm wrong, right? Like that could mean
it could. Well,
all of it.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things. It's all speculation, until like we're kind of like people who are analyzing the NFL draft, and then nobody ever goes back and reviews how right or wrong those people were and how bad those picks were.
Right? Like, oh yeah, like I thought I predicted that Dr. Shah would get in the race. Well, yeah, but I predicted a bunch of things that didn't happen too. Because I also thought, like, I thought the ranked choice voting was going to be a big problem during the primary that Sean Moody won, but then Sean Moody had over 50% of the vote. He did it decisively, and largely, I think, because he had the LePage support, and it was pretty clear with Ann LePage endorsing him, Lauren working on the campaign. I think Paul technically stayed out of it, but I think a lot of people saw it as a wink and a nod. I thought that was going to be a big problem then. I hope it's not now either. I hope that what we said is what comes to fruition, is that whoever wins decisively, or whoever wins on the first ballot is the one that ultimately, when Dale Crafts won in a 3-way primary, he won each round. So he won the first round, and then when Eric Brakey was eliminated, Dale still won. And so I think that's the type of win that you'd want to see, because I think that could be a hiccup that just wouldn't be helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right. Well, thank you so much again. And thank everybody for watching. We'll be back here again, hopefully Monday. There's a snag that came up for me, but hopefully we'll be back on Monday night. And we will see you all then. Thanks so much.
What is the Lincoln dinner tomorrow? That sounds like it's going to be good.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're sold out the Lincoln dinner. Twice as many people as we've ever had before, from what I understand. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you got tickets, because they're all sold out. All right.